Hello.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hi.
I think people are slowly making their way over from the keynote. So we're just a little bit behind schedule, but I think we have everybody here now. So I'm going to press on. So I'm not responsible for knocking the whole day out of whack. That would not be good. Yeah, hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are watching from. And if you've just joined us, welcome to the Museums+Tech 2020, which is a virtual version of the Museum Computer Group's annual conference. My name's Scott Billings, and I'm a member of the MCG committee, and I work at the Museum of Natural History at Oxford University in a sometimes digital role, sometimes not. This year's Museums+Tech conference is asking what role digital can play in responding to crisis, and we've had plenty of those in the last 12 months or so. And I'm really pleased to be chairing this session of talks on audiences, each of which takes a different look at some of the challenges faced by cultural institutions in reaching audiences during the pandemic, especially when the doors to physical sites have obviously had to be closed. Just to let you know how it's going to work, in the session we've got 3 10-minute talks, and then we'll follow that by a roughly 15-minute Q&A session. If you want to ask a question, use the session chat on the right-hand side of your screen now. You'll see in the chat there's an event tab and there's a session tab, so put your questions into the session bit, and I will try and select as many of those as I can to put to the speakers at the end of the session. So you can do that during the talks or on this Q&A at the end. I'll introduce each of the speakers in between the talks, I think, so that it's kind of fresh when they're about to talk. So, but just to do a quick overview, our speakers for this session are, excuse me, Martin Spellerberg and Grace Poole of Spellerberg Associates, Alix Geddes of One Further, and Chris Howe of Clearleft. So yes, I'll come back to a proper introduction when we get to each talk, but first up we have Martin and Grace from Spellerberg Associates. Martin is principal at Spellerberg, which is a consultancy based in Texas, working on digital projects with artists, museums and cultural institutions. And Martin's been working in the arts and culture sector since the 1990s. Here he's going to be presenting with Grace, who's a researcher at Spellerberg, and they're going to be talking about how the role of the websites of around 20 museums in the US had to adapt following the closure of the museums in response to the pandemic. So Martin, Grace, if you're good to go, I will hand over to you. And you've got 10 minutes and I'll hopefully not have to jump in and keep you to time. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen and let me know if you are seeing that. Yes. Yeah, looks good. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. So Grace and I are going to talk about a project that we did this summer, where we surveyed cultural institutions about their web traffic over the lockdown. So really early on in the pandemic, I spun up this project. It was something I think it was sort of my way of sort of coping with what was going on and of understanding what was going on. So we spoke with upwards of 60, 70 institutions. 20 actually took part and provided us data and participated in interviews. These were, they're almost all in the US, and it's very heavy on arts institutions, though not exclusive. And these were institutions that heard about the project, so they're sort of from our professional networks. They heard about us. We didn't turn anybody away, but I do want to flag that's sort of just how the sample came together. So it's not really, you know, statistically probably the sample that you would want for that, but we didn't turn anybody away. These were just the institutions that heard about it and chose to take part. We gathered information from Google Analytics and through interviews with representatives of the institutions. Grace, do you want to talk about this slide?
Yeah, I mean, we, as Marty said, we collected analytics, Google Analytics, both quantitative and then qualitative data, which included the interviews that Marty mentioned, but also the slide that you see here, which is the institution's top 10 pages. And in order to make that quantifiable in a way or able to be analyzed for us, because each institution gave us their own individual unique URLs from their website. I created a coding system that you see on the right with these 10 kind of umbrella categories to try to make sense of everybody's top 10 pages. So those buckets included digital content, virtual or digital events, collections, education. If an institution had a specific COVID-19 response page for their visitors, an about page, employment, visiting in-person exhibitions, and in-person experience. So just trying to make kind of sense of all of these URLs that people were giving us from their analytics profiles.
Yeah, and so as you can see, the type of content that was most accessed during our study period, there was a divergence. This display shows sessions for all the institutions in the study. So you'll see in early March, mid-March, that was when the lockdown really happened here in the US. A lot of institutions experienced a drop in web traffic, but there were a few institutions that saw a rise. So the lines, the yellow and the orange. The yellow is Art 21, which is not actually a museum. It's a television show, a public broadcast television show about art and artists, and they have 20 years worth of video archive on their site. The orange line that also went up, that's the Met, Metropolitan Museum, and the kind of salmon line that goes up just a week later, that's the Geddes in Los Angeles. But as you can see, just about everybody else saw a dip during that time. So we thought it would be interesting to focus on the dippers. So this takes out those three institutions that I highlighted and shows that the dotted line is the average of these institutions. So I want to say we're going to think of these as a benchmark, and the way benchmarking works is if your goal is to achieve a competitive advantage, then what that means is that you are performing above average, similar institutions, companies or institutions. And so it's important to know where the average is. And so we find the average and we call that the benchmark. And then we're going to look at practices that were associated with each of the institutions. So here's a couple of them. And so how we determine these practices is in the interviews, if an institution mentioned that they did a certain thing, then we associated their name with that practice. And then we took an average of the institutions that were associated with that practice, and that's what's represented by these colored lines here. So a causation or correlation question. What we can't say that an institution or that a practice itself performs or over or underperforms, but I think we can say that the institution that has that practice performs or underperforms. So, Grace, do you want to say anything about this about what these practices are?
Yeah, so as you'll see in the kind of following slides, the practices that are indicated on these slides are drawn from the main questions that we had in the interviews that we asked every participant. So the one that you see here, we basically asked them what was the main purpose or kind of spirit of your homepage. How did it function prior to the pandemic? So what you see on the right is 2 responses that these participants in the study said that their homepage functioned as prior to lockdown or shutdown in March. So most people said either they used their homepage as a way to show general information, prioritizing visit planning, the visit experience for a visitor, or they said that the main purpose of their homepage was to highlight their current or upcoming exhibitions.
So, conscious of time, we'll move quickly. These practices have to do with the creation of new content. So I know that we, and it was referenced in the keynote, you know, when lockdown happened, people kind of scrambled to just try a lot of new things and to put a lot of new content online, and these practices all have to do with types of new content. I'll skip forward just in the interest of time, because in contrast, these practices have to do with repurposing content that existed previously, and as we can see, these are the practices that really overperform the baseline. So to me, this was a little bit surprising, and of course, it's the fact that they have this content, but it's also the fact that these were institutions that had a culture prior to the pandemic that allowed them to have content that could be repurposed, and these institutions performed better on average than the institutions who hit the pandemic and said, you know, we got to get some material online, you know. Here, I'm just gonna, if it's okay, I'm just gonna skip forward. So this is a summary of what we've shown, and so there's the 3 institutions that I highlighted at the outset. We have the average of repurposing existing content, and then homepages that are focused on exhibitions. And if my takeaway, and if I were to editorialize it a little bit, I would say it really pays to like, what is it about this repurposed digital content? It's probably material that took some time to make, you know, digital publications, online exhibitions, rather than just the week-to-week churn of blog posts or you know, just quick hits. Also, and also I would say we spend a lot of time as practitioners sort of on the exhibition schedule, and I think a takeaway that I would suggest is that we try to, if we're thinking about digital content that's really going to pay off, then we might want to hop off that exhibition schedule. Support the exhibitions, but if we're really going to invest our time, invest in longer term evergreen content. So that's it. Over to the next.
Thanks very much, both of you. I'm sure we can come back to some of those findings in the Q&A in a moment, but I won't do that yet, so we can press on. So our next speaker is Alix Geddes. Alix is a digital analyst at research agency One Further, where she has worked with clients including the British Museum, the Tate and the V&A, helping them to improve the performance of their websites and digital content. So related to what Marty and Grace were talking about. Today, Alix is going to talk to us about the online content shared by museums in the UK during the various crises of 2020. In particular, how humour has been employed. And also she's going to be drawing on a survey to assess what content was most successful and what we can learn from it. So this is a supporting subject really from what we've just heard. So if you're ready to go, Alix, I will pass on over to you.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Just going to share presentation, if I can find it. There you go. All right. Thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm Alix Geddes from One Further, and I'm going to be talking about entertaining audiences during a time of crisis. So the year 2020 has been particularly difficult. That's an understatement. And I wanted to have a look specifically at what kind of content museums posted on their websites, as well as social media. So what did they post and what was effective? In terms of the methodology, I've been looking at website analytics from Google Analytics from 4 large UK-based museums, as well as social media analytics and a survey that is ongoing. I will give the details of that at the very end of the talk if you would like to participate or request results. So the first thing I would like to do is talk about how the audience for museums has shifted from on-site to online. Museums have had to physically shut their doors, and as such, there's so much less visits on their websites to the what's on and the visit sections of the site. But they did see a massive increase in sections during the lockdown period, which was from March to July 2020, and that's a comparison year on year. Some of them even saw a 400% increase, which is absolute madness. But so what I would like to just have a quick look at what content actually performed well. So we had exhibition-related content about cancelled and postponed exhibitions, some of them introducing virtual exhibitions and how to enjoy the content from home so that people don't actually lose coming to visit museums. There were also some collection-related content, such as specific objects from the permanent collections. Some activities, I think everybody has seen the curve of Google Trend searches on how to keep my child busy or how to make sure that my child is doing something while I'm in a meeting on Zoom. And finally, and this is the interesting part, there were also a lot of broader topics that were education-oriented related to school curriculums. And the reason for that is that museums attracted a new kind of audience during the lockdown period, which was educational referrals, so teachers and students. So these referrals grew by 454% year on year during the lockdown period, and they were composed of websites such as Google Classroom, as well as BBC Bitesize, all that kind of websites, which is very interesting. So there was a shift in the audience. Social media referrals also increased by 48% year on year during the lockdown period, which leads me to talk about how museums had to adapt in times of crisis. So through a survey, I asked museums social media managers about their content through 2021 and asked them how it changed. The first thing that popped up in the results was this, that the collections related content was posted 70% more frequently during lockdown. So I asked a question, which type of social media content was posted a lot, sometimes or never on social media. Obviously, exhibitions and events used to be posted a lot before the lockdown, but as you can see, this has decreased by 52% during the lockdown. Same goes for customer service, and that's because the needs have changed during that lockdown. So we've seen a much higher proportion of posts relating to collections and objects, as well as current events and museum hashtag campaigns, history, building, location, everything. But so what did people actually respond to? What changed? So these are the lessons that we can take from the new content. The first thing that I noticed was that a few museums were reporting that Zen and nature-focused content actually performed well. So people were drawn to things such as calming images, happy, silly, and warm content, or nature love and nature photos, especially during the early part of lockdown, which shows that there was some kind of escapism wanted from visiting museum profiles on social media. The second main point was humor. Humor was very popular, and there was as well a desire of escapism from reality. So as you can see here, some of the quotes, the more reactive and humorous content played really well. Fun and upbeat posts generated more engagement, which is always good to see. And finally, something else that I wanted to draw attention to was the popular museum hashtags. So the hashtag museum from home was one of the most popular, and on Instagram alone it was used 200,000 times. And my personal favorite, curator battle, actually shows incredible success, because after their first tweet, the Yorkshire Museum actually gained 8,000 followers. If this isn't a definition of success, then I don't know what is. There was also this phenomenon of recreating art on social media with common household objects. So this was the Getty Museum Challenge, and this was taken on by this Instagram account. If you don't follow it, I strongly advise that you do. It will put a smile on your face. It's at Tussenkunst en Quarantaine. This is a Dutch account, and it means between art and quarantine. So to this day, it's got 272,000 followers, but within 1 month of existence, so it joined Instagram in early March of this year, and by early April, it had already reached 228,000 followers, which is extremely interesting. And this hasn't died down so far, because they have been posting every day pictures that I will show you afterwards. And getting on average 8,000 likes per post. Here are a few of my favorites that I really liked. I personally really love the avocado. If somebody can top that, please tag me in it. And finally, this leads me to talking about how museums have been finding new types of content. So in my survey, I asked what museums did differently. Did they do anything new during the lockdown period in terms of social media content? And here are the results. So the first thing I'd like to draw attention to is that 6% of respondents said that they did the same as usual, which means that 94% actually did something different, which is absolutely incredible. They all felt the need that they needed to do something different to attract more audience, or a new kind of audience, which is always good to see, seeing museums innovate on social media. The first thing that people did a lot of was participating in social media challenges and trends. So we've seen that earlier. So that's the hashtag Museums Unlocked, hashtag Curator Battle, that kind of stuff. But something else that they did was posting more regularly. How do you get more engagement and more followers? It doesn't necessarily come from just changing the type of content that you are posting. It also comes from increasing your frequency, posting more regularly, posting more often, and all of that. And what stemmed from this? 81% of the museums surveyed, so more engagement after doing something different on social media. So you're going to ask me, but what were the successes? What actually worked? Well, I've got the answer right there. People enjoyed seeing the interaction with others. So that's an interaction with institutions. So through all of these hashtags and the curator battle and just these games in between institutions that took place on social media. But also, most importantly, it was interacting with the community, getting people to engage with them, and not necessarily just with a like, but also with comments. And here we've got examples of activities that were done on social media, such as games on Guess the Object, quizzes, photo contests, that kind of things, which is extremely interesting. And some museums also reported that they were responding to comments much more, which is always good to see. There was also a lot of escaping from negative news through Zen, nature, positive, and humor content. We've touched on that before. Some like the respondents have said that people were coming to their websites or to their social media accounts because they enjoyed the nature shots or they enjoyed the historical photos, because they just wanted to escape from the constant negative news. I don't know about you, but I had to turn the news off a few times during this year, because at some point too much negative content just isn't good. And then there was also something that was a little bit hit and miss. It was participation in trending hashtags. So obviously in a wonderful world, the hashtag curator battle, hashtag museums unlocked, or hashtags museums from home, that kind of trends would work well. It does work well for some, however, not for everybody. And that might be due to a few reasons. It might be due to the size of your institution, or simply to the audience. Maybe your audience is just not attracted to that. Or maybe it's a different audience that is actually attracted to that. So this is something to take into consideration. So what should you do now? And what should you walk away from this talk with? So here are 3 things that I would like you to do now. First is analyzing your audience. See what kind of content worked for you. Tailor it to your institution. Don't copy what others do blindly. Your audience may be different online compared to on-site, and it may have changed, and it can change for every kind of event. Then also invest in useful content, solve user needs, focus on your museum and collections, but with a different spin. This comes through analyzing your audience. You will know what they need, what they want to see. And finally, experiment with varied topics. The usual call to actions were a bit compromised this year. The usual buy a ticket here, buy a membership there, were quite irrelevant this year, unfortunately. So there was a need to find new of call to actions to attract people to your website. Listen to what your followers like and how they respond to it. Do something different. Test things out. It's good that some of the respondents in the survey actually tried things with the trending hashtags, because then they were able to see, oh well, it doesn't work for me, I will do something else. That's it from me. Thank you very much for listening to me today. You can contact me here through Twitter, LinkedIn, or sending me an email. If you would like to participate in the survey or request the results, please go on onefurther.com/mcg. The results will be revealed in a couple of weeks. I'm going to let the survey run a little bit longer. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Alex. That's great. We've got a few questions coming in, which we'll come back to in a moment. But before we do that, we're going to move on to our final speaker, who is Chris Howe. And Chris is the Principal User Experience Consultant at Clearleft, which is a digital design consultancy based in Brighton in the UK. Chris has worked on large public engagement projects for museums, including the Met and Whitney Art Museums in New York, and the British Library, the Tate, and the Science Museum here in the UK. But in this talk, Chris is going to be discussing some of the challenges of turning the hugely popular Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, which attracts around 5 million visitors a year to the exhibition in the Natural History Museum in London, turning that into a compelling and ongoing digital destination. And I think at the end, Chris is also going to be joined for the Q&A by Emma Mulliner, who's project manager for digital services at the Natural History Museum. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Scott. I haven't seen Emma yet appear in the chat. If you're there, Emma, do send a message to say that you will join us. I'm going to go through reimagining a physical exhibition as a digital destination. And I could start by going, do you remember these days when we could co-design together? So I've got a warning, there's going to be some images of people working together and they're not socially distanced. And that's because this project was started last year with phases of discovery and exploration, but the website was launched during lockdown. And I think it's a very lockdown appropriate project to be talking about. So I want to share with you today 4 guiding principles that we used in a collaboration between Clearleft and the Natural History Museum to help reimagine their Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition as a digital destination. But first, let me set the scene with a little bit about the exhibition itself. The Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition has run annually since 1964. It gets 50,000 entries each year from photographers across 100 countries. The exhibition itself is a showcase of the best 100 photographs that are initially shown in South Kensington at the Natural History Museum, and then the exhibition goes on tour. And in scale and presentation, the physical exhibition is exceptional. It's breathtaking. In contrast, the website had less of a clear identity. It somehow was stuck between being a promotional flyer to get people to visit the physical exhibition, and it contained content that failed to celebrate the subject matter. So let me show you briefly what we created, and then I can go through some guiding principles that helped us to get to where we got to. So the microsite was reimagined from scratch, although repurposing and representing lots of existing content. And the intention behind it was to create an evergreen and ever-growing collection of the world's best wildlife photographs. And as importantly, a way of telling the environmental stories and the science behind the images. I've got 3 very short videos that pull out some of the key features of the exhibition. So we wanted to create an immersive experience to allow people to explore the images. One of the ways we did that was by having filters driven by metadata to allow users to explore the photographs around the dimensions they cared about. So if you were interested in macro photographs of mammals in Asia, you could create a set of those. If you just wanted to see the overall winners of the competition over the last decade, you could find a collection of those. And importantly, you could traverse that set of images and you could share that set of images with other people, which obviously has marketing benefits as well as shareable viral benefits. We also had a concept of creating ladders of links. So using the taxonomies behind some of the metadata to allow people to, with one click, get around this ever-growing collection. So the idea being, if you were interested in cats, you could click on a link to mammals because we know that all cats are mammals. Likewise, we could programmatically take photographs that were tagged with Chile and know that they would sit within a wider set of images around South America. So using the API to help the audience make discoveries. And then the third feature that I want to show is deep zoom. Using OpenSeaDragon, the user can get to see the intimate details of the images in a way that they can't in the physical exhibition. So our design decisions were informed by some guiding principles that were there to help us make this shift to consider and create an online exhibition as a digital destination, and not just creating marketing material to drive physical visits. And I believe the 4 guiding principles that I'm going to go through are appropriate for all museums and all exhibitions of any size. They scale very well, up and down. The first principle is to design the digital experience from the get-go, rather than coming after the physical exhibition. Design the online presence as a unique entity in its own right. Now, obviously, this year that's been shown to be a useful thing to do. The reach of digital, both in visitor numbers and geographically, makes it a vital part of any museum's work in distributing the knowledge that it has. And by creating an exhibition as a digital destination, it opens up instantly a huge addressable market for your message. To help us in creating an experience that was fitting for the medium, we looked at how we could exacerbate and celebrate the strengths of digital to best showcase the content we were working with. And as you saw in the video clips, trying to create a habit of engagement and serendipitous flow through this growing archive. Now, this list isn't, of course, exhaustive, but it acted as a really useful prompt when the team were coming up with ideas to ensure that we were thinking digital first. The second approach is to have contact with the audience. I strongly believe that to create a memorable and meaningful digital experience requires a relentless focus on the needs of the audience. And one way to do that is through regular contact time. This photo from GDS, the Government Digital Service, I think sums it up perfectly. Your audience and your potential future audience aren't always in the museum. And I would highly recommend mixing both usability testing with regular research interviews to find out the needs of the audience around your subject matter. I can safely say all of the best features in the microsite came from ideas sparked from conversations with the intended audience. Now, even though we were doing the research prior to lockdown, we did all of our initial research remotely. And that's because we wanted to talk to people that were geographically distanced from the museum. And we recruited people through mailing lists, targeted advertising on social media, introductions to relevant friends of friends. And it was a great opportunity to have conversations that we wouldn't normally have if we weren't doing this remotely. I can remember a day having a conversation in the morning with Margaret, who was in a hide overlooking a bird colony in Pembrokeshire. And then in the afternoon, a competition entrant who had literally just climbed onto a dive boat, having taken some underwater photos that morning. The third approach is to think about quality over quantity. For a physical exhibition, getting people to visit once is a successful outcome. Even better if they recommend to their friends and family the exhibition. But for digital, repeat visits and deepening engagement, I think, is the successful outcome, which means you need to design for interest over time. The phrase minimum viable product, I think, is one of the most misunderstood terms in digital. True organizational and user value comes from focusing on design quality, with quantity as the happy byproduct of that. So instead of launching the basics and building on that base, the approach we took was to deliver a great user experience by releasing thin slices of quality and having regular releases of content as we went through. We heard from many of the user interviews that quality was something that was missing generally. Audiences had no shortage of information sources, but what they were lacking was content that was really exciting and really informative. And I think this is a challenge in the digital world. We are effectively in an arms race. The audience's expectations of a quality digital experience are rising rapidly and continue to do so at a pace. And the challenge is that the expectations that are set are not by other places in the cultural sector, but by other places that the audience visit online. And keeping up with those user expectations is made easier if you focus on thin slices of quality. And the final approach is to start taking a product mindset rather than a project mindset. Taking an approach where we're looking at the online exhibition as an ongoing entity that will be built upon as we collect data from the moment we launch. We can introduce new features, we can get data, and we can keep building. And the Natural History Museum have done that. We've recently run a workshop to see how we can develop and utilize the API behind the system in new and interesting ways. And I think this is true of all museums that have subject matter that is of evergreen interest for an audience. So 4 approaches to start making that shift in mindset from being a website that drives traffic to the physical building, to start having exhibitions that truly are digital in the way that they've been conceived and the way that they are developed over time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. And thanks to everyone, to our speakers. If you want to put your cameras back on now, we can have everyone back. That was a great session of talks, and I think there's lots of overlap there, and lots of things that, that's my timer that I didn't need, Chris, to tell you you'd run out of time. That certainly resonates with lots of the things that we've been thinking about at the museum where I work over the last few months. I'm aware we're a little bit kind of pushing the edge of time, because we started a little bit late, and I don't want to knock the day out, as I said, but I'm going to just do one sort of general question, which I hopefully maybe everyone can answer, and then if there are any more questions from people, pop them into the chat really quickly now. One of the things which I think sort of speaks to all the things that you've talked about is that the lockdown precipitated a kind of scrabble to as Zach said earlier in his keynote, get something online, get it online, whatever it may be. And Marty and Grace, you talked a little bit about the difference between sharing content that had already been developed and been developed carefully versus sort of putting things out more quickly, and that the sharing of pre-existing content performed more effectively, I think. However, you know, Alex, you talked about how responses that are more rapid on social media, that were kind of rapid response type things, challenges and so on, were also, and using humor, were also effective. And then Chris, in your presentation, again, it's that thing about turning to digital in its own right and creating a destination in its own right. So I'm, amongst all those things, I'm just interested what your thoughts are. Look, with the experience we've just had in 2020, what of the things that have been tried and succeeded or failed, what should start to become business as usual in our digital content production? So if we whip round everyone, maybe in the order you spoke, so Marty first, Marty and Grace first.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the way I would frame this year is that we have, and to speak to the theme of audiences, I think we always have 2 audiences for our museum websites. We have the audience that will come and visit us, but then this year we had an opportunity to see the audience who won't come and visit us. We very often prioritize the on-site visit. We do digital for the on-site visit, and of course that's important. But I think this year we really got a look at that other audience, that audience who isn't going to come, and I think they exist all the time. We just don't see them in the same numbers. And so you know, I'm curious as to what the other panelists say about the best way to serve them. But I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, to jump on that as well, I think that what should be business as usual now would be to constantly analyze your audience, because it changes even according to the different types of exhibitions that you have on. So an exhibition on, like, I don't know, like art from India might attract different people from an exhibition on the Renaissance. So I think that it's absolutely imperative that there is a regular analysis of the audience, and that way it will help you to tailor any content to that audience specifically while still staying relevant for the other.
Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I think, you know, my perspective is definitely as a museum outsider. I love working with museums, but I work in other sectors as well. But I can see that for museums, the change in business as usual is hopefully an understanding that digital is an absolutely vital element in delivering the mission of the museum, and not just being a marketing function that is trying to drive traffic to come in. That I think museums are almost were created by accident. You know, collectors went out, they put things in cabinets. The cabinets got too full. They put them in buildings. And suddenly one thing that's happened with COVID is maybe we've had to readdress that. That if you were to create museums now with no history and no heritage, they wouldn't necessarily be big buildings in South Kensington. You would probably start online. And that's the way that you can distribute the most important thing, which is the mission and the knowledge you have.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's something that's sort of dawned on us, all of us, I suppose, in this year, which is it's taken there's a comment from Chris Cullen in the chat saying that things will never go back to the way they were, and that's a good thing, and that there will be this growth in virtual audiences. But it's funny how, I found it strange how it's taken this kind of crisis to really pull that into focus, even though it was sort of obvious in a way. But another question, which I think was for Alix, from Rafi Cecilia, which is, do you have any data on how people with disabilities engaged with online content during the lockdown as opposed to before? She said she was thinking of blind and partially sighted people, but any marginalised group who might be marginalised from accessing a physical space.
So I don't have any data on that specific point in that specific survey. However, I would advise Rafi Cecilia to have a look at the Culture Restart data. So that's a new alliance that One Further is part of, along with Indigo and Baker Richards, and they do ask some questions relating to disabilities and how people engage with culture before, during, after lockdown, and they just cut the data according to these different segments. So that would be where I would go.
Great, thanks very much. I think I haven't got any extra questions in the chat, and I know there's a little break now before we go on to the next session. So I think, in the interest of time, we will wrap up there. But thank you very much to everybody. Obviously, you can continue to message each other in the chat throughout the event, and share links and so on and so forth. So thanks very much to everybody in the audience's session panel.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Hello, everybody. I've just popped in to tell you that we have a break now, and we will resume at 3 p.m, which is in about 20 minutes. You may also play networking roulette if you like, which pairs you up with somebody random for about 4 minutes, somebody who is also in the networking thing, and you can have an audio-visual chat. And if it's going badly, you can just leave. So yeah, we will be back with some more information about what's coming up next in about 20 minutes. See you soon.